Um, all right, well, welcome everybody. I am Tina Krug, and we at the APLD virtual chapter are very excited to welcome you to today's webinar with our own member, Cheri Stringer. Like I said, my name is Tina Krug. I'm the secretary of the virtual chapter, and the rest of our membership at the board level for the virtual chapter includes Marty Letson, who is our president. Kathy Hubner is our treasurer, and Ellen Johnson is our committee director. And I do want to take this opportunity right quick to encourage all of you to jump in and get involved in your chapter, wherever your chapter might be. If you're a member of the virtual committee, our committees include education, membership, social media, certification, sponsorship, and website. And we would love you to be involved in any one of those. Look for emails from us in the next few weeks as we continue to build this chapter. And also feel free to reach out to me or any of the board members at any time. APLD National also has committees that welcome involvement. Those committees include advocacy, certification, conference, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they have a meeting coming up. Education, membership, sponsorship, and then also sustainability. And they also have a meeting coming up real soon, actually this Thursday. You 100% get what you give in this organization. And it really is an incredible way to learn and grow as a professional. So I just personally recommend that you find a committee that interests you and jump in. You won't be sorry. So for a little housekeeping for this presentation, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a bar, and you'll see on there the chat option and the Q&A option. You can submit a question at any time during the webinar. If you just click the Q&A window to open it up, you can type your question in. Cheri's going to answer questions at the end of the webinar, but also we're going to try a little interactive Q&A in the middle of the webinar, which we hope will work. And we'll roll with it one way or the other. So please do be patient with us as we do that. But anytime during the webinar, if questions come up, just get those into the Q&A so that we can hit them at the end. You can use the chat, as people have been doing, to talk, hang out, say anything on the side that you want to, but I won't be looking there for questions. So if you have a question, put it in the Q&A. You will also using that chat, just wanted to mention that you can change the default. I think that the setting is to just panelists at first, so you can change it to panelists and attendees for it to go to everybody. Let's see. So one last bit, trying to make sure that the screens are set up right. We have this set for speaker view and Cheri's shared screen. Once Cheri begins her presentation, you can set your view to speaker view on your own computer just to make sure that you're seeing Cheri's face and the presentation while of all of her slides. And you can adjust the size to make one bigger or smaller, depending on what's going to work for your computer. So hopefully, oh my goodness, sorry. Hopefully that helps. We are recording this webinar, even my jumbly mess I'm doing right now. And we will edit it out and try to get it sent out to participants afterwards. But I will just go ahead and say this is our virtual chapter's very first webinar. We certainly have more coming down the pike, and we also just have a regular Zoom meeting every single month. So there's lots of ways to be involved, but we are all professionals in something other than Zoom webinars. So please be patient with us and just roll with us as we do this. So with all of that finished, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Cheri Stringer to us. Cheri Stringer, FAPLD, has been reconnecting her clients to the outdoors since 2005, designing and building outdoor spaces as the owner of TLC Gardens. She is proud to come from 4 generations of architects, and Cheri trained in the field under licensed landscape architects for many years before starting her own landscape design build company. Cheri has a Bachelor of Science with an engineering minor, a master's degree in molecular biology, a background in horticulture, over 15 years experience in building her designs in the field, and a constant drive, and this is no surprise, to train and learn. Cheri was professionally certified as a landscape designer in 2015, and under her leadership, TLC's projects have won 10 International Design Build Awards. In 2020, Cheri and the TLC team have been working diligently on expanding their offerings. And now, of course, we're in 2021 and that's still happening. Expanding those offerings with TLC Mobile and TLC Steel, designing and fabricating modern steel structures for outdoor environments across the country. Please welcome Cheri.
Hey guys, it's so good to have this opportunity to talk to you today. I'm so excited to be able to share some amazing footage from designers that inspire me and from our own projects. I'm hoping that it will give you a background on the rise of steel. So are we all ready to roll? Let's go. So on this very first slide, just to start into the segue of using steel in outdoor environments. Steel has given a rise to the use of it as a structure underlying. In this particular slide, there is a steel structure underneath the wood. But more importantly, using steel in the outdoor environment has become a passion of mine and many designers across the world. One thing to note from this photo is that the structure of the moon gate, which is made out of steel, and I'll go into the details later in this presentation, segues from the driveway to a private space off of the Tai Chi studio. Whenever we're creating something in the environment, I like to think about the fact that we're designing not only to be able to integrate it on site in construction, but to create meaning and value in the end design. Now, steel has risen up in its approach and use in the landscape because of its multifaceted use. We're going to look first at steel in the outdoor environment in inspiring gardens and its use in inspiring gardens in different ways. So in this, like all of the different gardens that I look at that people are designing that inspire me, I selected some that I think really represent a plethora of how we can use steel in our outdoor environments to elevate the space and how steel has risen over the last 10 years because of alloys that have been developed and other techniques that allow it to be utilized in ways that it wasn't before that. So we're first going to touch on these inspiring gardens. I'm going to touch on the meaning in these spaces, what I see as a designer and why I think it's exciting. Then we're going to go into the actual materials used in constructing steel elements. And then we'll go into some examples of designs from start to finish, examples of integration on our own projects, and we'll end with some do's and don'ts, some basics. So to start off with, we'll start off with inspiring gardens. With this very first one here, the very first thing that I noted on this particular garden, which was taken as a photo from the Cheri's tours, it's an entrance to the herb garden. The steel that's used here is a weathered steel. The weathered steel serves as an aesthetic element, and then it also serves as a boundary between, like, you're entering into the garden. When I look at this picture, it just draws me in. I want to go into this garden. But it also, because of its thickness and its height in the image, it repeats the pattern of the concrete contemporary entry, and it rises it up a little bit, and then the thickness makes it a statement. The final patina of it plays so well with the plant material that it just elevates the entrance above what it would be without the steel being present. It provides a focal point, a view corridor, and a transitional element. Love it. Anytime I'm going to use steel in the landscape and in the outdoor environment, I want to do what I call a quad down. I want to basically create something that serves 4 different elements within the landscape so I can deliver a value. So this one here is another example of a quad down from that first one. And this one inspires me so much. This is Julia Maservi. She created a handrail in this outdoor environment. Why am I calling it a quad down? What the heck is that anyway? So a quad down is where you are doing 4 different things at once. So let's take a look at this. She created this steel reel, and this is the beauty of steel. I can use it as a structural element. This is a slope site. The steel is being used to generate the steps. It's being used to generate the flow pattern, to dictate the view corridor, and to create an aesthetic element because it's visually appealing. It's got the circular pattern that allows me to want to walk up those steps and feel and experience the space that Julia created. It's created in a golden circle ratio, and the sound of the water is aesthetically pleasing. So it's a quad down. And this is what I love about steel. I can utilize steel in curves, in structures, in flow pattern, in view corridors, and in aesthetics to create an outdoor environment with one element that has a simplicity and an elegance for modern designs. We can get playful with it. Here's a wall designed by Scott Eckley at Scott Eckley's Designs in Seattle, where the kids can put their magnets on it, play around with their names, and we've created a privacy area, an area for play, and then interchange the materials. You know what I love about this, it just really stands out, is they've integrated a raw I-beam. We're going to talk about all the different materials. A raw I-beam that's untreated with the weathered steel that has the beautiful artistic patina that you see here. And the design is integrated, the seams to give it a more industrial look. I just love this work by Scott Eckley. It's so playful and yet functional at the same time and beautiful as well. I've shown some other examples of use of steel in the landscape here. Using steel as a terracing element, as walls, as planters is very common. We'll show you some examples of utilizing that in our own projects when it's really fun to do. Pretty much anytime I can look at something and think about using steel, these days I do it because it creates so much value in the end landscape. So here you see the terraced grass steps, and then at the bottom there, I included this sort of contemporary garden that Scott Eckley designed and created that uses a stainless steel water feature element to create some contemplation in the environment. And we're going to talk about all the different types of steel in this webinar. So it's really exciting to first show you the inspiration and the gardens that inspire me and when I'm thinking about design within this and what purposes they serve. So far we have tackled some of the elements in which steel can be used in the outdoor environment, but not all of them. We've looked at framing, welcoming entrance, the artistic component of it, the thickness of it, and the patina of it that we're using. We can use it in a playful gesture. We can use it as structure. We can dictate flow and view corridors. There's really no limit to what you can do with steel. Here's 4 more examples of designs that I find inspiring. In the top left, you'll see that steel was used to create steps. What's great about this is, again, it's a triple down. Here we have something that is seamless and simple, yet the steel has got such strength to it, we don't need to add anything else. It's unfettered, it's sophisticated and understated. I love it. And yet, at the same time, it's beautiful. I can't wait to use them as a step. I never thought of doing that until now when I was doing these slides, and I was like, wow, look at this, this is inspiring. It generates a feeling and an idea of what we can do with steel because of its structural components and because of the innovations of steel over the last 10 years with these steel alloys that allow us to have weathered steel that doesn't corrode. If you look at the bottom quadrant on the left-hand side, what you'll see is the pattern done by Mary Bensfield Architecture. She has a wall there where she's actually laser cut into the steel wall, a pattern that reminds me of what the plant material would look like if I had plant material growing down the wall. I love it because it's playful, but it's also sophisticated and modern, and it creates space in this small courtyard that makes it feel bigger than it does while it creates privacy as well. On the top right corner is a design done by Andrea Cochran using traditional materials for an Asian garden. She's using like deep stone, dark stone, granite, polished rocks, and a gravel contemplation area. But here's where the steel really shines in this design, in my opinion. The steel just screams out at you to look at the focal point and draws you into the fire pit area because it's tied intimately to the view corridor from within the home. When you look out there visually, that piece of steel has weight to it, has scale to it, and draws you to it. And I love it. The lighting, everything plays off of it. The steel plays off the fire plays off the steel. In the bottom quadrant is a design done by cube architecture. And sorry, the steps at the beginning is done by Studio Solem or Serem. And in the bottom right is done by cube architecture. Here is a good example of the use of steel in a playful way to take a small space and make it feel bigger. They've used the planters to do a geometrical pattern. Love it. They're playing off the different textures and colors, the sand finished concrete, the polished stone, the water feature is the central element of it. They've created a steel water feature. It's hard to see in this one, but then they've done something really fun. I mean, steel is an art form anyway, right? So let's do a little parody on that. And let's actually put steel on the wall as a piece of artwork. The patina that you can create with weathered steel and with raw steel can create an art form in itself. What I love about this design is that they've actually integrated the thickness of the steel to give it a feeling of like a canvas up on the wall. I love it. Really good design.
Hey, Cheri, sorry to interrupt right quick before we move on to the next one. Emma had mentioned it's possible for you to make your display screen here just a little bit larger.
I don't know if I can because it went to the wrong screen and that screen is smaller. If I can.
Yeah, let's just take just a sec, you guys. I know I've heard from a few of you that it's pretty small. One thing that you can do is move, there's a vertical line in the middle of your bar and you can move it over to make the speaker, like the little face part, the video part as small as possible. And then that will make the screen that Cheri's sharing her slides on, that'll make it as large as possible.
Are you wanting me to do that or are you wanting?
I was just talking to everybody else while if there's nothing else that you're able to do on your end, that could be a thing that could help for everybody else.
Yeah, it's showing it on two different screens, but I was.
It's fine. Yeah. And do not take too long, Cheri. I'm able to see it and it's so good on here. On your view options, everybody who's watching, on your view options, you have a drop down and you can take that up to full screen or 150%. I'm seeing other people say, so just try that, y'all. And somebody just mentioned to everybody that they bumped it up to 200%. Looks like a lot of people are saying they're able to see better now. So let's keep going. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think this will be great. So
no, it's fine. Yeah, I want people to be able to see. That one slide too is the one slide that I put multiple designs on. So it should be better now that, there's single designs on each slide. Thank you for letting me know, you guys. I appreciate it.
Definitely. So, thanks, everybody.
Yeah, so this segues to steel in modern design. Use of steel in modern design that I've been talking about in these outdoor environments is some examples of the use of steel in very creative ways in which I've been inspired by other designers and architects in outdoor living spaces. This particular slide is more meaningful to me than some of the others even on top of that. And the reason for that is that it really focuses in on the steel in modern design and what it's about. So here is a contemplative center that Andrea Cochran designed. And within this one image is the use of steel in a lot of novel ways. So the steel panels on the end of the reflection garden have a little gap between them. And we can see through them to the landscape behind. There's a little bit of light that comes through, but those panels are varied in size and they go down from a big size to a smaller size. They also are weathered steel that has been given the chance to naturally patina. So as this site ages, the patina will gradually increase for all of those panels, but it will be different for each one. So it'll add character and sense of place to the site. The nature of the steel as a sculptural element, but also as a barrier and a see-through element, gives this sort of contemplative garden that feeling that I just want to stop. I want to stop and I want to meditate. I want to meditate and I want to stay here a while. But she's combined it, again, it's like a quad down because she's combined it with several different elements. On the right-hand side is the use of steel as a planter. It's a structural element that provides planting material and a screen for that and gives privacy to this area. In the back are the panels that serve as a sculptural element and a see-through element and give us, we want to stop and pause and appreciate it. But the stone sculpture in the middle of the reflection garden is the artistic piece that makes us like, wow, let's stop and wonder about the creative and the artistry. And then the reflection of all that within the pool plays on all of the different elements in here in terms of using steel in design, using the structure of steel, the scale of steel, the use of it in different and creative ways to create a feeling on a site is really an amazing application of steel here and steel in modern design. And all of this is achieved with a clean and modern look, which, is beautiful. So when we look at steel in modern design, what I'm transitioning to here is talking about the materials we're going to use in steel, all the different components of it, how they're put together, and then my process when I'm thinking about designing something with steel, and then how our team integrates it into a site. So here are two examples of sites that we have completed. Western Exposure was completed in 2012 and won a silver award. And on the right, Controverte, the planters for that, won 2 awards with APLD and NALP. And the first slide here, now we're using steel as an understated element to match the patterns of the architecture. The main fence that is shown here has a steel element on the top rail and the post that's been powder coated to match the steel on the gutters of the home and all the steel work that the architect designed for this home. This was Stephen Dodd Architecture. I worked with him during the entire process of developing this site. And so in this particular design, steel played an understated role, but it was an important one because wherever we used this steel that was powder coated, it matched the home's architecture and it mimicked the colors and served as a pattern repeat. You'll also notice that the gate on Western Exposure, which we see just a little bit of in this presentation, we'll see in another slide later better, is a custom fabricated gate that uses tube steel with plate steel in a pattern and a laser cut that's added to that. And we'll get into more of that in a minute. On the right-hand side are steel planters that were designed and fabricated and then powder coated in a color to match the home's architecture. And then we use the steel color on these planters to counterpoint the plant material and the colors of the plant materials. This is an entry to a modern home, Controverte. So when we're thinking about material or steel as a design element, we have to think about all the different components that we might be utilizing when we're designing a structure or an element or a unique element in a site, whether we're doing something like Julian's survey where we're creating a custom rail that has a curve to it, or we're doing stairs, or we're doing planters or other features in the landscape. So here I'm going to cover some different kinds of steel, and I'm going to reiterate that throughout the presentation because there's good examples of it everywhere, like what I've used in different projects and what I've learned over the years. So what you see here is you'll see several different images. The first that I'm going to talk about is sheet steel. Now, steel has had an evolution over the last 10 years. When weathered steel was first introduced, it was trademarked as Core 10 steel. Core 10 steel, which was originally broadcast into the architectural world, was an alloy. The important thing to know about core 10, and now what's considered to be weathered steel, which is the same thing because you can't actually get core 10 anymore, is that weathered steel is an alloy steel, which means that it's recycled steel. All the steel that's used is recycled into the weathered steel, and that weathered steel alloy is more resistant to corrosion than raw steel or regular steel that we can buy from our steel suppliers. So whenever I'm doing a steel element in the garden, if I'm doing something that I really want to last, I'm going to use weathered steel. Now, since we can't get core 10 anymore, we can get sheet steel. We can't get core 10. It's very hard to get. You just, when you specify it, you want to say weathered steel, and you want to say 606, 582, or 847. Those are the numbers of the steel alloys that are put together for weathered steel. Now, weathered steel can get patinaed or not patinaed, and it is resistant to corrosion. So it's really great for art forms. Some of the examples I gave you in these gardens where it's being used in outdoor environments is where they've actually created this custom patina for the steel by applying muriatic acid to it. And weathered steel, these steel alloys that are completely recycled, are going to be the best for that because they won't have the corrosion that raw steel will have. You can still patina raw steel, but it can corrode, especially in salt environments or wet environments. And we're lucky here in dry environments, we can use raw steel in a lot of applications. So you have sheet steel. The sheet steel, you can get raw steel, you can get weathered steel, you can get stainless steel, really expensive, but people do it. With the sheet steel, it's important to know your sizes. You got to know what sizes you're dealing with. And I'll show some examples of that when we're integrating, like say walls and stuff like that. If you know what your sheet steel supplier, what sheet sizes you can get them in, then you can design with that in mind because you'll have to have seams. A good example of that is Scott Eckley's design of the wall. He's taken into consideration the sheet steel sizes into the seaming of the wall and actually woven it into the design. So you can get sheet steel and core 10 weathered steel, as it's called now, in weathered steel, raw steel, or stainless steel. And that comes in sheet steel panels. You can get hollow core steel, which is hollow tube. You see here, I have an example or an image of rectangle tubes, which I'll show you an implementation of that in our designs next, and then square tube. I use square tube a lot, I use rectangle tube a lot, and I use all the different sizes because hollow tube steel or square tube steel also comes in round tubes, can be used to reinforce the sheet steel. And so I use that a lot to reinforce the sheet steel. I use it a lot in fence applications and panel applications and in pergolas to design them. Additionally, you have a flat bar. Flat bar is shown at the bottom here in the silver one at the bottom on the left-hand side of the slide. Flat bar is just exactly what it sounds like. It's flat bar steel. It comes in all different gauges. Now I use flat bar where I'm connecting joints, where I'm anchoring the steel into the landscape. Flat bar is easy to tack weld onto a structure that you've already designed. I'll show you how to do that. But so you've got sheet steel, tube steel, flat bar. There's one more piece that's really good to know. And there's a lot of pieces of steel that you can get acquainted with, but these are the ones that I use all the time when I'm designing and integrating steel, is angle iron. I use angle iron to reinforce the steel structure inside, and I also use angle iron when we're attaching panels and anchoring them to the site. And I'll show you some examples of that later. So we got sheet steel, tube steel, flat bar, and angle iron, and they do come in all different gauges. Now, typically, we're all working in architectural terms. I know me, I like to be 1/8 inch scale, right? So when I first started designing with steel, I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna use 1/4 inch steel, I'm gonna use 1/8 inch steel. I put a gauge marker on here because you really wanna know what the gauges of steel are, because it's not exactly the same. For example, you can see, if you guys can all blow it up, you'll see that 1/4 inch obviously is 0.25, but if you go up to the 20, 24 gauge, 22 gauge, that's in between those two, right? So if I wanna use 1/4 inch plate steel, then I'm gonna be in that gauge. And you're gonna need to specify the gauge of steel for every component, for the sheet steel, for the flat bar, for the hollow core wall, the tube steel. It'll have different thicknesses on the wall, and that'll give it different tensile strengths. So I'll explain that when I'm going through, like when we, use these applications, what thicknesses in general we're using, but thicker is usually better. 1/8 inch steel, I don't use a lot. I only use it as an accent. So just keep that in mind. I always start with 1/4 inch or thicker to use most of my steel elements. So the last piece on this slide is, you'll see in the top right-hand side, I created a design for a custom gate, and I just gave an example here of that gate. It's tube steel that's been welded together, and then hinges have been added, and we created an architectural bronze slider for the gate in the middle. And so it's just showing the use of tube steel in a structure, and I'll show you a lot more here in a minute. Let me see if I can get my scroll bar to work. Okay. Okay. Do we have any questions? Does anyone want to raise their hand and want to pause for a moment and see if we can get somebody on board? If anybody has any questions, just click a raise your hand and we'll try to bring you on board to do a little interactive dialogue here.
All right, we have definitely got some hands raised.
Nice.
Let's see. All right, I'm gonna allow Katie to talk.
Okay.
Let's see, I'm just asking Katie to unmute. You there?
All right. Hi. Hi. Thanks for the great webinar. I was wondering, I was wondering if you could repeat, you said some numbers that that need to be in the weathered steel alloy.
Yes.
And
no problem.
And I didn't catch all. I caught 606 and 582, but I didn't catch the other.
Sure. So it's 847, 588, and 606.
Okay.
And those numbers refer to the alloys, right? So those numbers are corresponding to the weathered steel alloys that you can use in the outdoor environment. So if you specify those alloys, you'll be getting weathered steel, which is the same as Core 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who does the welding? Do you, I mean, I'm assuming you don't do it yourself. I mean, you probably know how to, but you don't do it yourself. Who do you just find a welder that you like to work with, or?
That's a great question, and we are going to talk about that in the webinar a little bit later.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that's a great question that will be answered. So thanks for asking that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else that want to raise their hand? Has a question before we move on?
Sorry, Scott Mortensen had his hand raised and I just permitted him, so I think he's good to go. Scott, are you there? Looks like I've got Scott unmuted and he's unmuted. Scott, can you hear us? All right, well, I'm moving on to Eileen Kelly.
Okay, awesome.
She's just muted just for a second, so.
Yep.
Hi there. Hi there, Cheri. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah,
hi, I'm just about to specify some steel, which I'm so happy that you're telling me that, quote, Core 10 is no longer, used, or not used. It's not the name used. It's the weathered steel.
Correct.
And I have one colleague who's been using a milled steel, and I guess that's a non-weathered steel. And correct. She was telling me because it's a lot less expensive than the weathered steel. Obviously, as you were saying that it will corrode faster, but any idea of how long it would last?
It depends on your environment. Where are you located? Like where?
I'm in California, just north of San Francisco.
Oh, okay, great. So I mean, your weather is pretty mild compared to like East Coast. Right. You're gonna have a lot more corrosion going on with the steel than you are on the West Coast. Right. So you're looking. I mean, it depends on how you patina it too. We're going to talk about the patina next and how you apply muriatic acid. But let's just assume that you do apply muriatic acid to the steel, and you're wanting to get that patina look. it can literally corrode within a year. So if you're using if you're going to use milled steel, because it is cheaper to get, right? I mean, the weathered steel alloys are more expensive. They are recycled, but they're more expensive. If you're using milled steel, go with a much thicker steel, right? Because then the corrosive surface that you're making on the outside will form a natural barrier, right, to the corrosion of the rest of the steel. And I would up my thickness. So typically when I'm doing planters, I start with a 1/4 inch steel. And if you're using milled steel, then I might start with 3/8.
That's perfect. Thank you. When it corrodes, does it just start to crumble down? Crumble?
It flakes. So what happens when it corrodes is it forms a corrosion layer, almost like an air bubble away from the steel. And then if you tap it, then it'll flake off. And then you get sort of like these pockets of corrosion on the outside of the steel.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Thank you.
What are you
so much,
creating?
Cheri.
What are you creating, Eileen?
Sorry?
What are you designing?
Low retaining walls on a
Okay, great.
slope,
Great.
maybe
Okay. This is
2
a
feet
great
high.
question. Don't feel like you're taking up too much time because everybody can benefit from this question. I love that you asked this.
Okay, and then we have one last part of that too.
Yep.
I'm not sure, I have to talk with the contractor because I know he's
Yeah.
done this, but I was just curious what type of support would be used if it is a 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch, in, what kind of post?
Yep. Yep. We're gonna talk about that a little bit, but for a wall,
Perfect.
you're gonna want to pour piers. You're going to have a strategic partner, someone who's building it or your own team, right? That can pour piers. You're going to want to use angle iron to support the wall on the inside where the soil is pushing against it, right? So you're going to kind of counterbalance the wall against where it's exposed back into the soil. And you're going to pour piers that are back from that. Typically we go anywhere from 6 to 8 feet back from the wall. We pour a pier and then we tie angle iron to that.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, to support it. And there's a lot of different ways of doing it. A lot of contractors have different ways of doing it. Sometimes we anchor it with plate steel as well. But you're going to want to, engineering wise, right? If you have soil pushing out on the wall,
Sure.
you're going to want to anchor it and then have angle iron coming down, right, to pull it back and counteract that weight pushing it out.
All right, makes sense. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for asking that question. It's great. Okay.
Thank you.
And everybody keep on putting your questions in the Q&A and we can hit those again here at the end. It's about 2:45 right now.
I love this because that was such a great question and it's going to feed right into the rest of the slides here. So thank you so much for raising your hand and being willing to get on and do some dialogue. So with this slide here, when I say impact of choice, I'm going to show you 3 different pergolas here using different materials. Here we're using the raw I-beam, and here on this pergola on the left-hand side, we're using I-beams, right? So it's just another material you can use for steel. Raw I-beams instead of hollow tube were used in this particular site to generate the industrial look and feel and modern feel that we wanted. But one thing you're going to want to notice is the difference between these 3. So we've got raw steel. This was raw steel, not weathered steel I-beams. Because of their thickness, I'm not worried about the corrosion here in Colorado. And then on the right-hand side is a hollow tube pergola that was done on another site that was powder coated. Now, each one of these pergolas was designed so that the pieces fit together. I'll show you some of that detail later. But the main point of this particular slide is to point out that we're using hollow square tube on the upper right pergola, and then we're using hollow rectangular tube for the beams, right? So we've got the posts and the beams. And then we're using stainless steel brackets for the top where we attach the wood and stainless steel fasteners. In the bottom corner on the right is another pergola that was powder coated a different color. You literally have like 26, 37 different colors you can powder coat steel. One thing to keep in mind is if you're doing raw steel and you're going for a patina, that's great. If you're using powder coated, it does chip. It's not flawless. So when you do get powder coating, make sure you set the expectations of your clients correctly, that it is going to chip and there will be spots that they'll have to paint up. And I'll show you some examples of that farther on as well. Okay, so I don't know why my slide's not advancing. Okay, delayed. All right. There. This is an example of patina. This is just showing the progression of patina when the muriatic acid is applied to weathered steel or raw steel. This is a planter that we fabricated in our shop and then treated with muriatic acid. And the middle slide is showing its patina after about a week. And the slide on the right-hand side is after a couple weeks exposure to the sun and the elements. And that's actually what we want. And each side of the planter will have a different patina. So we've covered kind of the materials of steel that we can use, and we've covered inspirational designs in the outdoor environment. Now we're going to talk about the steel design process and integration on our construction sites. My favorite part. So in the steel design process for the moon gate, for example, anytime that I'm designing something on a site with steel, I start with the end product in mind. So I'm going to start with a rendering, whether I'm making that on the computer, which I'll show you some, or I'm hand drawing it like I did here. I'll start with a hand-drawn rendering or a computer-generated rendering, and then I'll back up from that to create the design. With this particular design, I created a detail where we're using sheet steel, we're using plate steel, we're using angle iron and tube steel on the inside to reinforce the structure. And that's the details that you're seeing here on this slide are showing the different components of the steel. Now you also want to think about the gauge, because I'm going to advance it to the next slide here. I'm going to show you actually as us building us in the site. One of the things you want to think about when you're designing with steel is you want to know all the different components. Then you want to be thinking about the fact that the components are going to be prefabricated. They're going to be pre-cut. Then they're going to be delivered to site. So with this moon gate, all the pieces were delivered to site on a pallet. They were flat. And then we lifted them up. We tack welded them together on site. Tack welding is super easy to do in the field. You can have a strategic partner or a team like I've developed that can tack weld. And you can tack weld on the site, and then you can lift the structure into place. You need to keep in mind that the steel is heavy. So you're going to need equipment to lift it and move it. It's not like you can just, it's not like, you know, you can just move the sheets around. So for example, with this moon gate, we tacked it all together on site. We built foundations underneath that were below frost and built a lintel and poured it all together. So it was all in piece, 3 inches below the patio. Then we assembled the moon gate, lifted it on, anchored it through the plate steel on the bottom. So if you go back here on this slide, I show one of the ones on the right-hand side shows the model turned upside down, plate steel on the bottom with a hole in the middle, which allows you to anchor through it. Then the other thing that you want to keep in mind is that if you have any element of it that you really want to be flexible, like with this moon gate, the centerpiece, you want to use a thinner gauge steel. So this entire thing was constructed with 1/4 inch plate steel, and then the centerpiece was 1/8 inch so that I could bend it and mold it to the structure of the moon gate. And here you see us applying the wood to the moon gate and applying the top. The top was made separately. We did tube steel in the middle. I gave an up close of the inside of the moon gate so you can see how the wood was finished and cut to that finish, and then the finished moon gate in the site. This is a sign that we developed for our Gallagher Farm site. And this is a great segue because it shows the design. On the left-hand side, I developed the scale and size of it on the site that the client wanted to see. This is going to be their entrance statement when people come in to see that it's Gallagher Farm. And then in the middle slide, you'll see the tube steel that was used as a structure underneath. Now, when you're a designer and you're thinking, I want to start using steel, you don't have to do all this stuff yourself. You can find a steel fabricator that you go to, and they do this structural components like this. They fabricate it all for you, and then they bring it to site, and they can bring machinery to install it as well. But if you're thinking about all these components, you're going to design a better feature for these outdoor landscapes that's custom designed, and the steel guys are going to love you for it, and your team's going to love you for it, and the clients are going to love you for it. So here in the middle slide, you have sheet steel that was used as the base that's seen on the left-hand side, and then the tube steel is what's there so that we can place the panels against the tube steel and give internal structure to the final design. Now you're seeing the sign sitting in our shop, and our team worked on this and fabricated. This one was really fun and challenging because we actually decided to fold at the top. You'll notice if you look closely at this slide that the corners are folded, not straight edged. So we then treated it with muriatic acid, and I'll show you an example of that in the landscape later on. So we had to then get it in the trucks and lift it onto site and anchor it onto the concrete footers. So how do we, as design, we start with a finished product, we think about all the different materials, how they're going to come together. Again, remember, you want to tack weld on site. You don't want to do any serious welding on site. It's a lot easier to tack weld on our construction sites. You can do serious welding like bead welds and things that need structural strength. The fabricators can do that in the fabrication, or you can do it in your shop. So if we're problem solving on a site, this is a problem site. I'm going to give you an example of how we solve problems with steel in several different ways on this site. So this was the starting site. Obviously, not real exciting to go out into. The clients had remodeled the inside of their home beautifully. It was all contemporary architecture, beautifully designed on the inside out. The main windows inside are the kitchen that they look out to upon landing from there. So we had several different issues that we had to address here. We had noise coming in from a neighboring pool that were coming across and into this courtyard. We had these window wells that were just made of, you know, the stone block that you can buy, and you can see the clients had stacked sandbags so the water wasn't going into their basement. Then we have two different threshold doors that needed to be matched. Now this was looking over the most beautiful view on the site into a pond area. And so what I wanted to do was provide solutions for the site that would solve all of their problems. So in problem solving with the steel, this is what we ended up with. And I'm going to give you several slides of how we use steel to solve the problems, and we use the different materials I've been talking about. We created a steel pergola out of I-beams that we naturally patinaed with rust. We did this because it's a site with a lot of heritage and a lot of farm heritage of multiple generations. There's a lot of rusted equipment all over. And so it speaks to the heritage of the site. But more importantly, it extended the view from the kitchen out to the pond landing. It created a dining terrace here. But it also, steel was used to create more space on this patio. As you saw, those window wells were a big component of that. We wanted to actually minimize the amount of space that was needed for the window wells and then create these raised stone beds so that kids and grandchildren could play on this space. So we're utilizing steel to solve some problems here. And on the side here, I've indicated or shown a little segue of the construction detail, which shows how these posts are put together. Again, I'm using an I-beam with flat stock for flanges that go out, and then I can bolt it together on site. That means that I can have the posts all manufactured, the beams all manufactured, and come to site and I can bolt them together. One of the other problems with this area, just showing a rendering from the top, and I forgot to change this rendering. Shoot, okay, is one of the things that didn't get changed, is that we created a steel utility enclosure in the rendering. The steel utility enclosure blocked the sound from the neighboring pool, but it also blocked the trash cans and the other things they needed to store in that area so that we could have this outdoor environment that didn't have to look at that steel enclosure. You see the steel enclosure on the right-hand side is the raw steel that was originally delivered to site. Now I used 3/8" thick steel here because I was using steel to solve the problem of sound and privacy, right? I wanted to corner that off, but I also wanted to make a statement with the steel, and it's really patinaed nicely in this outdoor environment to give a beautiful like sculptural effect in solving some of the problems on site with steel. Now, this segues into integration, where I'm going to talk about the window wells that solved another problem for that courtyard with steel and using steel in the design. When we're thinking about solving a problem, this looks from the pergola from the side. You can see the walls that were integrated. And then this earlier photo of construction from almost a year ago shows the steel window well. Now, by using sheet steel and angle iron to reinforce the window wells, we were able to use window wells, steel window wells here with 3/8" steel. And we gained 1.5 feet back into that courtyard. And it allowed us to match those two thresholds and create a courtyard area by using steel to solve the problem. What you see as concrete footers in front of the steel window wells are the footers for the future veneer walls that are seen in the lower photo. Now I've included the design detail for these window wells just so you can see how simple it is to design with steel as soon as you know what the components are. This is a master bedroom screen. Screens are really easy to do in the outdoor landscape. They're utilized a lot, both to give compression and framing, but also to give privacy. So this particular screen, the pattern on it was designed so that we could then place it in the landscape. I show a rendering here that we showed the clients before we actually had it made, showing them what it would look like in their outdoor environment. And then I show a picture of it actually installed in the environment. Now, when we're installing steel elements, aside from window wells, we actually want to create a foundation underneath. We pour footers down to frost level. For those of you that are in California and other areas, you don't have to do that. We pour footers down to frost level and then pour a lintel on top of that. The steel gets mounted to that and anchored to that. And then I use tube steel and angle iron when I'm using panels like this. So the angle iron goes at the bottom, the panel sits like this, the angle iron goes like this, and then it gets mounted into the footer. This is an example from start to finish of steel integration with a concrete pad early on. This was late January last year on the site. We created a concrete footer with piers in the ground, just like I was talking about. So you pour the 2 piers and then a lintel on top. It all poured as one monolithic structure. That means it won't shift in the freeze thaw for us. In the middle is a steel, double-walled steel fire pit that I designed with sheet steel. In order to reinforce the sheet steel, I used tube steel on the inside of the double-walled design, and then I used 1/4-inch stock to do the double-walled steel design, had them laser cut out the vent holes for the future fire pit. I then had the fire pit elements installed, the gas line, the burner, all those things needed for the fire pit. And I created a concrete top so that we could get the contrast with the steel and the concrete and the environment and just elevate the space a little bit more. One thing you'll note before I play the video on this of them installing the top is that I always try to wrap any steel I put on stone with some polished stone. And so you'll see a border of polished stone. Not only does it elevate the steel by adding more textural contrast, but it serves a functional purpose. When you're patining the steel and it gets that rust patina, the rust will flake off onto the stone and it'll stain it. So it's really important whenever you're designing to think about where, if you're doing patinaed steel, where it might impact the stone surface or the patio surface too, and just plan ahead for that. See if I can get this video to play. So what they're doing.
Lining the cap right now, the double-walled fireplace, and making sure there's a little inset step that catches the cap piece and keeps it from shifting on the top. And you won't be able to see it when it's finished, but you might be able to see it from this angle on the inset there on the far side. You can see kind of a lip on the cap. So they're getting it set now, and then we'll line it.
So in this particular installation, this was just really fun. We had a Grayscape Studio design a concrete countertop with a really nice sand finish to it. And then they came with their little bladders and then installed it on the top. But I designed the top so it had a lip to catch the steel. Anytime that you're designing a steel element, think about the things that you're going to combine that steel element with. Are you going to combine it with concrete? Are you going to combine it with plant material? Are you going to integrate it with wood? And if you are doing that, I usually try to use the structural component of steel to add another layer of value. So here, I didn't want the kids or anyone around the fire pit to be able to bump the top and move it. So I created a lip that sat down into the double-walled steel. This is a mailbox design that we designed for the site, for another site, for the same site, actually. And here I want to just point out some major questions people normally have about working with steel, and I had when I first started too. Should I do it myself? Should I weld this stuff myself? Should I outsource it? Should I use a fabricator? Should I use a partner? And I can tell you I've been down all of those roads. And what we've ended up with is we actually have a team that is skilled at, tack welding, bead welding, spot welding. But if you don't have a team, you need a partner who can weld on site. They need a MIG or a TIG welder. They can tack weld things together. But the most efficient way to do it is to design all the pieces with the structural integrity it needs and to outsource it to a steel fabricator that really knows what they're doing. Here in Colorado, we use Roadrunner Fabrication. They're a large fabrication shop that can do just about anything. They can laser cut the steel, they can weld it together, they've got all of the machinery and equipment to do it. We also use NOCO water jets. They do a lot of our laser cutting of the panels. So in this particular design, what you'll notice is that the design was created so that we had laser cutouts that matched the master bedroom panel. We had each piece prefabricated and made, and then we just tack welded it together. Then we added the custom components. Then we're going to take the whole thing to site and mount it to the concrete base with the plates on the bottom. When we're integrating a steel wall, this is an example of a steel wall. I know, Eileen, that you're doing one as well. This is a giant steel wall that we ended up integrating into the modern design at the front of this home. The point was to create an Italian Renaissance parking area. And we wanted to use something that was very clean, had a modern look to it. And because steel has such a great structure and can be used as a structural element, we used it to, well, quad down. So we used it as a structural piece, as an aesthetic piece, as a modern and clean piece, and then we added the patina to it. So I'm showing you images here of my original sketch, and then as we were constructing the wall. Here's an example if you're doing planters or steel walls where you want to know what your sheet sizes are, because the sheet sizes that you can get will dictate the equipment machinery that you need to have on site. Each one of these panels was 8 feet long, and we needed a machine, a mini X or a skid steer that could handle the weight of the steel panels. And then we needed to be able to weld them together on site to be able to integrate the wall. Anytime you're doing wall, you want to pour piers, and you want to anchor the wall to the piers, and you want to use angle iron in a triangle from the wall. So that reinforces it. So when we were building this, it was pretty fun because we were getting a lot of curves in the wall we had to straighten out, we had to reinforce. We learned a lot of things about using steel and creating a wall when we were developing the wall at this site, especially a wall of this length and requiring, the weight of cars on it. So on the left-hand or on the right-hand side, you see the finished profile of the wall, which we will treat with muriatic acid to get that patina. And we're going to add plant material in front of that to get the finished look of the Italian Renaissance driveway. Now, steel design integration, there's some things that really work, and I've talked about some of them, and there's some things that don't. And one of the things that really works is always integrating lighting with the steel designs. If you get laser cuts done with a water jet, you can do really fine cuts like these hand sketches that were converted to steel panels. You can light them from behind with well lights or accent lights, and it really makes a big impact. I show here the plate steel that I used to mount them in a construction photo before we cut off the bolts to show how we mount them to the structure. Now, in this particular sense, we poured a solid concrete wall, so we just anchored them to the wall. But typically, you'd be anchoring panels to a pier or a lintel of some kind, and you can often hide the plates. In this case, we didn't want to as part of the design, but you can integrate the plates lower than your cap or lower than your patio or lower than your deck and wrap around them and wrap around the posts. So here in these, what was really good about the design was we used sheet steel, we used tube stock, we used plate steel, and then we reinforced it with angle iron where we tack welded on site. We had everything prefabricated and cut, and then just tack welded it together on site and anchored it. It's always good when you're doing steel integration, whenever you're using powder coating, to always think about the lighting that you want to integrate, especially if you're doing a structure like a pergola. Here with these pergolas, I integrated the holes for the lights and the mounting brackets so that all we had to do, inspect the lights, so that all we had to do was fish the wire through and mount the lights. If you're doing a heater or a shade or anything like that, when you're designing the steel, integrate in the holes and the elements that you want to use for the steel, especially if it's going to be powder coated. Because once you send it out to powder coat, you really can't weld on site. It's going to destroy the powder coating. And then of course you got to have some fun. So this is our team just jumping off a wall. I'm really thankful to my whole team. They really make everything possible that we do. And we have a lot of fun with it. And if you want to stay with us and stay connected and get our updates, we're starting a newsletter to update people on all the different stories and experiences we have in developing these unique and custom sites. And my partners in this business, Jaime and Bill, are shown on the slide. I owe them so much. They give to me every day and allow me to do what I do best, which is design. And then Emma, who is not on this slide, she helped make this entire presentation. Thank you, Emma, so much for you. I'm grateful for all of you. And now we can open up to questions.
All right, well, thank you so much, Cheri. I know everybody got a ton out of that. That was so much to think about. We had some questions at the beginning. I'll try to hit those, and y'all, I'm going to do my best to sort of coordinate the questions as I go, combine them if they all make sense. So one that should be easy for you to answer, there's a handful of them that are about wicking when you're using muriatic acid, some details about concentration, and then also how the rust, the patina, might move. So there's a question about the moon gate, the cedar that connects with it, stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, let's go. Okay, so which one do you want me to answer first?
Oh yeah, well, I think what was in my head was just cover that. So let's see, muriatic acid, what concentration?
Okay, great. You want to mix the muriatic acid in a 1:6 ratio.
Okay, all right, great.
Okay.
Then we had a, this idea of the raw steel beams of the pergola. Are they dripping any rust? Are you seeing that move? Or again, the cedar that's up against the steel in the moon gate, are we seeing it move that way?
Okay, so in general with using, I'm just going to tackle the rust first. In general, with using any kind of raw steel or weathered steel that you're going to patina, you will have rust dropping on the patio. When it comes to the pergola piece, and I'm just going to go back to, can they still see my slides?
I think so.
Okay, great.
Hey, will somebody say in the chat if y'all can see slides still? Okay, thanks everyone.
Yeah, so if I go back to this pergola here at Gallagher Farm, there you go. Here, the beams that go across, right? Since I used raw I-beams and I didn't do powder coating, they're dropping a little bit of rust. But most of the rust comes from the vertical elements, not from the horizontal. So the posts rust more and flake more rust onto the patio than the beams do. So whenever I'm designing, if I'm designing an overhead structure, I don't worry too much about the overhead horizontal, just because there isn't as much surface area, right, to drop onto the patio. But when I have a vertical structure, I'm always wrapping that. You see that at the bottom of the pergola here, I wrapped it with polished pebbles because that's where the rust is going to hit the patio. If I'm putting a planter on the patio, I will actually cut out the stone and put polished pebbles there or some other material, but I don't mind the rust getting on because it will stain, like all stone patios, it'll stain. You saw that also with the fire pit, right? When we did the fire pit segment, which actually is farther, sorry, let me go forward. And I was showing you the fire pits. Here, we wrapped the fire pit with polished beach pebbles so that, right, the vertical elements aren't staining the stone. Perfect. So now when it comes to the moon gate in the wood, when you're attaching wood to steel, and I showed you the mailbox and the moon gate, we typically use a liquid nails product called Fuse It. The reason we use Fuse It is because it's designed to expand and contract. So anything that you want to attach to the steel, you want to be able to expand and contract a little bit with the freeze-thaw cycle. And that also addresses as the steel patinas itself and it naturally ages and gets a little bit of a rust on the surface, you don't want to actually lose the bonding. So you need something like Fuse It that can bond through a porous layer and a non-porous layer. So anytime you're doing wood to steel, I use that liquid nails product that's called Fusic that has a little flexibility. It's almost like it's construction adhesive that's kind of like silly putty. It's flexible, and to move that. So did I answer that question?
I think you did.
If I didn't, I just enter it again in the question box if there's additional questions that you had when I described that.
Yeah,
Because I
that was
think
exactly what I was going to say.
okay.
Yeah, you guys hit those. Yeah, if there's more details to that, maybe sometimes things bring up new questions too. There's a few questions, Cheri, about the details of some of the images. So you may not even know answers to these, but like way back at the Andrea Cochran wall, there's a question about the gauge of steel that was used in that one.
Oh, I love that you guys are asking about this. This is great. Okay. So are they referring to, well, so in the reel part, right, on the right hand side where the water is flowing through the reel, so that's 1/4 inch stock. I know because I've been to the site. And then the reel that she did as a steel wall, that's 3/8 inch stock.
Yep. Okay. And this question was not about Julie's project. It was about Andrea Cochran's project.
Oh, it was. I'm sorry.
That's fine. No, there were also some questions about other uses. So that's perfect.
Yeah. So there's 2 of her projects. There's the contemplative garden, and then there's this one on this sheet, which is just this steel accent wall. And I don't know the gauge of this steel accent wall, but looking at the photo, I would say that it's 1/4 inch plate steel.
Okay.
Okay. And then on the contemplative garden, all of these panels were 3/8 inch steel. And these are all weathered steel panels. She just chose not to treat them with muriatic acid.
Yeah.
Now the planter on the right-hand side is 1/4 inch plate or sheet steel. I call it plate steel or sheet steel. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, y'all, I hope that helps. That seems to hit a handful of these questions. There's one more. Eileen had asked if you would let us know the type of steel used in the different photos. I think you've hit that. So you guys, if there were specific questions, specific images that you saw, just put that back in the questions for us. I don't think we have time to go through every single image. And Cheri also mentioned during the talk what the types were. So I think maybe hit that again if you had a specific one.
I'm happy to stay as long as people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we come back to that one then, and we'll hit some other ones. But yeah, I'm going to hold that question then and not set it as finished.
What I'll do is I'll just hit a couple of these.
Okay.
So in terms of the planter steel, this is all 1/4 inch stock. The moon gate was all 1/4 inch stock with 8 inch sheet steel in the center, half moon part, because I wanted to be able to bend it, right? Yeah. This was all 1/4 inch stock, and predominantly I don't use 1/8 inch. 1/8 inch steel is one of those things that doesn't work. It shows weld marks, it warps, it's not strong enough for most of the applications of steel. If I was a designer, I wouldn't even use 1/8 inch steel unless I was using it as an overlay. For example, let me go to this. I'm looking for the image. I don't know if you can see it here though. Oh, I lost that image. So we did an ornamental fence where I used 1/8 inch steel as an overlay. So we did 1/4 inch panel, and then I used 1/8 inch on top of that to get a shadow line to get an effect. But that's the only time I would use 1/8 inch steel.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
Yep.
Moving from the steel materials, one topic that came up a few times is that question about the planters and the heat that planters might hold that would affect plants.
Yep. So the way you counteract that is you do double walled. So a good example of that is the steel fire pit here, meaning that I'm creating a steel wall and I'm creating another steel wall with an air gap between them. The steel is going to get hot, but it's the outer steel that's going to get hot. So when you're creating planters, if you do a double wall in your design and you, if you look at this steel planter here, let me go back. If you fold the steel right on the top, and then you can have that double wall, you can have that look whether you have a single wall or a double wall, it doesn't change your look. That will address the heat issue of steel. But anytime you're designing with steel, you do have to think about how hot it's going to get. We have the utility enclosure that I talked about, and just didn't have the rendering set up so you could see the rendering of the enclosure. This gets really hot. So you also have to keep in mind, like, what is its sun exposure and how hot is it going to be? And is it in an area where that's going to matter, right? If it's where people are milling around, then you definitely want to do a double wall in your design, like I did with the fire pit.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. That's great. All right, you guys, I love all these questions coming in. So there's, let's see. Well, okay, I'm gonna start at the top. One question, Patricia St. John was wondering, it looks like I think you've covered this, but the thickness of the weathered steel. And I think you hit that in a number of images, and it might range.
Yeah. Can Patricia, can you enter in what you're thinking of designing with it? Because the thickness depends on what you're designing. Think of it this way. Patricia, I love your work. It's so great. Anyway, when you're designing, if you need more tensile strength, you need, the steel to not be able to bend, you're using it for a wall or a structural element, you definitely want to go 1/4 inch or thicker, right? So with the wall steel, I will do 3/8 or 1/2 inch steel. And then if you're doing something that's more aesthetic, I'll go to 1/4 inch steel because I want to maybe laser cut it out, or I'm doing something subtle and I don't need the structural integrity. If I'm doing an overlay, I'll do an 1/8 inch steel, right? If I'm doing like a panel on top of the 1/4 inch panel and trying to get a shadow line or some kind of a design effect that way, in general. If you're not sure about the structural strength you need, always go bigger rather than smaller, because that'll always be better. If you go too small on the gauge and it bends, then you end up just refabricating it. And I've done that a couple times. So.
Oh, that's sweet of you to say. Like, it's helpful. Okay, Susan Ryan had asked, and again, this was early on, but Susan had asked, is there a recap? Will there be a recap of the uses at the end?
Oh, yeah. So, it's a great question. I originally had that in the slideshow, and then I took it out because of time. But just to recap kind of the uses of steel in the outdoor environment, that was your question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the main uses, I'm going to recap that. This is such a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. The main uses for steel, as the rise of steel has happened, and now we have this weathered steel in this alley that we can use in all these different ways, is framing, right? So here's the moon gate. I'm framing the water feature. I'm framing the entrance. It's transition. Moon gate's doing that too. You're serving transitional elements. You're using it to transition from one space to the next. You're using it for compression or framing or aesthetics. Aesthetics, contrast with materials. This one's a good example on the CarX tours, how it makes the material pop from the plant material. But here's another example of using different materials to contrast with the steel. So the aesthetic contrast, using it as a playful nature, as a structural and playful element, as a structural element, as a flow pattern, a view corridor. And then lastly, as a piece of artwork to create contemplation. These are all the main uses that I use steel for, on top of creating compression pergolas, creating a sense of place or a destination. If I can create an area that's supposed to be the dining area, for example, that's supposed to be a destination. Now I've created an outdoor dining room with the structure that I've created with the steel. I love to quad down the steel. Use it as structure, use it as aesthetics, use it as framing, use it as view quarters. All of those things can be achieved with one material, and it's so clean and modern and beautiful that you can utilize it in all those different ways. So there you go.
Fantastic. That is fantastic. We had a couple of specific ones that'll be fast. So Susan Ollinger was wondering where you purchase steel.
Great question, Susan. So in your local area, what you want to do is find a steel wholesale supplier. That means the supplier that supplies your steel fabricators. You can find that easily by calling the big steel houses in the area. If you just type in steel fabricator, a couple will pull up. I usually will call like 4 or 5 different ones just to get one that I like working with. And then I will ask them, hey, where do you get your steel? And they'll usually tell you where they get their steel from. You can buy directly from. If you're going to do it with your own team or strategic partner, which I did for years before I had my own team, you can buy the steel wholesale, design and fabricate it, and then have a fabrication shop fabricate it, and then have your strategic partner put it together, weld it on site. That's the best way to do it, right? So you can get the best prices, and then you can pass that on to your clients in the finished, pricing of the completed item in the outdoor environment.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
We've got a couple of notes in the chat too. Just wanted to let everybody know who's listening in, just some good thoughts, like back to the uses of it. Somebody had mentioned too, for California, steel is fire safe, which I think that's just a genius thing to point out. So y'all look at the chat because folks are talking to as we're answering these last questions. This is fantastic. Ruben had a question about, he's pretty sure it's from the Contemplative Garden, those very large vertical steel panels. He just was curious about if they have reinforcement. Are they able to stand up on their own with the footing? So I think that's kind of maybe a quick question, a quick answer about starting to get height.
Yeah, when you're trying to get height. So anytime you're using steel panels like that in the landscape, you've got to think about wind load, right? So in the Contemplative Garden, which I'm going to put up here, and the Contemplative Garden and in all the applications in which I've used sheet steel in the same application, right? And it depends on your region, of course, if you're in frost, freeze thaw, right? But what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to anchor that panel to a footer, right? And so you're going to design the footer below where you want the finished panel to be. Then you're going to anchor that panel with, and remember when I talked about the different parts of steel, you're going to want to have angle iron. You have angle iron on each side of the panel is the simplest way to do it. And then plate steel along the bottom. You'll make holes in the plate steel so that you can put concrete anchors in. You can either use J-bolts that you put in the concrete that stick up and you put the plate steel over that, or you can use concrete anchors that you drill down in. But anytime you're doing something like this, that's where steel is a structural element, it will have to be anchored to a footer as well. So, in California, you can kind of get away with less of a footer than we can out here. But in terms of this Contemplative Garden, there is a footer right behind all of that these panels are attached to. And that helps to manage the wind load because, we're dealing with a solid surface. When the wind hits it, it needs to be able to handle that. So the anchors are what allow that to happen and the footers.
Yeah, okay, that's so great. There's so much knowledge. So, okay, our last question in the Q&A is, Claudia was wondering about a cross section to show the support of the steel retaining wall. And I'm going to just put a plug in here that you may not have that right now, but seems like to me we're building the case for another presentation sometime. I think there's a lot more details we could get into.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we'd all love it. It's just been fantastic.
Will they be able to see? They can see me. So I'm just going to do a quick sketch and I'll hold it up to the camera.
Oh, I love it.
It's not going to be really, as polished as those other plants. But
well, you could, if you stop sharing your screen, Cheri, you'll get bigger for all of us.
Yeah.
And then they can see your sketch here. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. 1 second.
This is like real. It's happening in real time, you guys. This is awesome.
Flat bar. Angle iron. Your wall.
While Cheri's sketching, we're going to wrap up here as we answer this question. Don't you love it? I mean, the chat is just like blowing up. Designer at work. Like, yeah, we're sketching right now. So Cheri's working. I'll just quick say, just thank you to all of you for being a part of this, for taking the time out of your work day. Thank you so much to Cheri for sharing your knowledge. And here we go. Take it away.
All right. Sorry, I was a little bit behind, but basically you've got your steel wall right here. Here's your steel wall. You'll want to make a triangle with angle iron. And that triangle will be welded to the steel wall here with tube steel. Then you'll have plate steel that you will weld to the triangle. So if this is where my wall is, this is where the soil is that I'm retaining. This side is, okay, let me draw one. Sorry. Okay. This is where the top of the soil is, and this is where the bottom is on the other side of the wall, right? I'm gonna have a pier on the side in which that I have the soil, right, that I'm retaining. And then I'm gonna anchor this angle iron with plate steel that I'm gonna weld to this, and I'm gonna anchor it into the pier that I've put down below frost level.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. All right.
So
Well,
I love you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this and allowing me to share all of this great stuff with you guys. I feel so connected to you, and I really appreciated the opportunity. Thank you.
yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.